All right, let's dive deep into the Enneagram Type 1.
The reformer.
Yeah, the reformer. We've got this great stack of articles from Personality NFT.
Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and it seems like our listeners ready to go beyond just the basics,
Yeah,
you know?
definitely. Way beyond the
So
basics.
what really jumped out at you when you were going through these articles?
It's funny because when you think about type 1, the word perfectionist always comes to mind, right?
Right.
But these articles really highlight that it's so much deeper than just like having a perfectly organized desk.
Yeah.
It's really about this deep yearning for goodness, both for themselves and for the world.
Hmm. That's so true. It's like they have this inner compass always pointing them towards what they believe is right, and they just can't help but try to live up to that ideal.
Absolutely. And, that drive can be such a powerful force for good. But as your articles point out, it can also be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, how so?
Well, because it can lead to a lot of self-criticism and struggles with control, especially when things don't meet their very high standards.
That makes total sense. And actually, one thing that really intrigued me was how the articles dive into the different levels of development for type 1s.
Oh, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
key part of understanding this type.
Because they explain how, at a healthy level, this desire for improvement can lead to some really incredible achievements, but at an unhealthy level,
Oh, yeah, it can really backfire.
and lead to some pretty negative behaviors.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not just about like understanding the core motivations of a type 1.
Right.
It's also about understanding how those motivations can manifest in healthy and unhealthy ways.
Exactly.
So, okay, we've established that type 1s have this intense desire for goodness and a drive for perfection.
Mm-hmm.
But where does that come from?
Well, the articles suggest it all stems from this deep-seated fear of being morally flawed or corrupt.
Wow.
It's almost like they're constantly trying to outrun their own shadow side.
So it's not just about achieving perfection in the outside world. It's
Right.
about overcoming this, like, perceived inner flaw.
Exactly. And that inner struggle, I think, is at the heart of what makes type 1s so complex and so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly striving, right? To be better, to do the right thing. But that striving can sometimes turn into this relentless inner critic.
So then, how do they escape that trap of self-criticism?
Yeah, that's the big question.
The articles mention wings and subtypes.
Yes.
Do those play a role?
They do. They definitely do. They add a lot of nuance to the type 1 personality,
Oh.
and it can actually influence how this core fear manifests.
So it's not enough to just say type 1.
Right. Exactly. There's more to it.
There are layers.
Yeah.
For example, the articles explain that type 1s with a type 9 wing, so this is the idealist,
Okay.
they tend to internalize their criticism. They become a little more introspective, maybe even withdrawn.
Oh, so instead of like directing their judgment outwards, they turn it inwards?
Exactly.
Wow.
Whereas type 1s with a type 2 wing,
Okay.
which is the
Right.
advocate.
Advocate, yeah. They tend to focus their energy outwards. They become very helpful, often becoming passionate about social causes.
That makes sense. It's like their desire for goodness is channeled outwards towards making a positive impact on the world.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so then you layer in subtypes on top of that,
Yeah.
and things get even more interesting.
Even more interesting because the subtypes really highlight how a type 1's core motivations are expressed through their dominant instinct, right? So either self-preservation, one-to-one connection, or social influence.
So it's like each subtype has a different flavor.
It does. It does.
Okay.
So for instance, a self-preservation type 1 might express their desire for goodness by meticulously maintaining a really healthy lifestyle or creating a secure, really orderly home environment.
So their perfectionism might manifest in a more practical, everyday way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Whereas like a one-to-one type 1 might channel all that intensity into their close relationships, really striving for that perfect connection with their partner.
I can see how that could be beautiful, but also challenging at the same time.
It definitely it has both sides to it.
Yeah.
And then finally you have like the social type 1 who often becomes a reformer, an advocate, seeking to improve, society as a whole.
It's all starting to make so much sense.
Yeah.
But it also highlights how important it is to go beyond just that, like, basic type 1 description.
I agree. And these articles do such a good job of showing how those wings and subtypes can dramatically influence, a type 1's personality,
Yeah.
their strengths, their challenges, even their career paths.
Oh, speaking of career paths,
Yes.
The articles actually had a really interesting section on ideal and worst fit jobs for Type 1s.
Yeah, very insightful.
For instance, they mentioned how a Type 1's strong sense of justice and their analytical skills could make them a fantastic judge.
Absolutely, a great fit.
But then they also cautioned against careers that require a lot of spontaneity and flexibility.
Oh, yeah.
Like, can you imagine a Type 1 trying to be a comedian?
I mean, it's possible, but it might be challenging, right? Where that perfectionism could really get in the way.
I'm starting to realize that, like, understanding your Enneagram type, especially your wings and subtypes,
Yeah,
it can be incredibly helpful
it really is.
for making choices, not just about your career, but your relationships too.
Absolutely. It's all about self-awareness.
Right. And speaking of self-awareness, I think we need to circle back to those levels of development we touched on earlier.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because the articles really provide this, like, insightful breakdown of how a Type 1's behavior
Yes.
can change dramatically depending on their level of health.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's unpack this a little bit.
Okay.
What are some of the key differences between a healthy Type 1 and an unhealthy one?
Well, at their healthiest, type 1s are really able to channel that idealism and that desire for improvement into positive action.
Hmm.
They're principled, just really compassionate leaders.
They're like the Gandhis and the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world.
Exactly. Those are great examples.
Yeah.
But as a type 1 moves into, average levels of development,
Yeah.
that idealism can start to morph into, rigidity,
Okay.
judgment.
Right.
They might become overly critical of themselves and others, really struggling to accept imperfections.
So it's like their greatest strength can actually become their biggest weakness.
Yeah, I mean, that's the danger with any Enneagram type, right? That your strengths,
Right.
when they're not, sort of consciously managed,
Yeah.
can really become your downfall.
And then at their unhealthiest?
Yeah, at their unhealthiest, type 1s can become consumed by anger,
Wow.
resentment, and even, a need to punish themselves and others for not living up to their impossibly high standards.
That sounds pretty bleak.
It can be, yeah, it can be. But, the good news is that the levels of development aren't fixed.
Okay.
Type 1s can move towards greater health and integration
Right.
by becoming more self-aware, practicing self-compassion, and, learning to loosen their grip on control a little bit.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And your sources offer some really practical advice for how type 1s can navigate that journey.
Like what?
Well, they talk about, the importance of finding healthy outlets for their anger,
Mm-hmm.
their frustration, things like practicing mindfulness and acceptance,
Okay.
and learning to forgive themselves and others.
It's like learning to be kinder to themselves, both inwardly and outwardly.
That's a beautiful way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
And they also highlight the importance of seeking support,
Okay.
whether it's, through therapy, spiritual guidance, or even just connecting with others who understand their struggles.
Because even the most independent Type 1 can benefit from a little help sometimes.
Absolutely. We all need support.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, it's about recognizing that their worthiness isn't dependent on achieving some impossible standard of perfection, right? It's about embracing their humanity, flaws and all.
And using their strengths to make a positive impact on the world without losing themselves in the process.
That's a great way to sum it up, yeah. And it kind of leads us to this final thought for, for all the type 1s out there.
What's that?
What if true goodness isn't about being flawless, but about embracing that messy, imperfect journey of growth and self-discovery?
That's such a powerful message, and I think it's something that all of us, regardless of our Enneagram type, can benefit from hearing.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up this first part, I'm curious to explore how all this applies to, like, relationships between different types.
Okay, yeah.
Do any of the articles touch on that?
They do. They actually have a whole section on, compatibility between type 1 and the other 8 types.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
I can imagine some types clashing more than others.
Oh, absolutely. And, one of the things that really struck me as I was reading through these articles was how much emphasis they placed on the idea that
Yeah.
the Enneagram isn't just about labeling ourselves.
Right.
It's about using that self-knowledge as a springboard for growth.
I think that's a really important distinction. It's not just about figuring out your type and then saying, okay, that's it, I'm done.
Exactly.
It's about using that information to become a more, like, conscious and intentional version of yourself.
Exactly. And for type 1s, I think that means, really leaning into the idea of progress over perfection.
Right.
Learning to embrace the journey even when it's messy and imperfect.
Yeah, the articles actually offered some really specific advice for type 1s who are struggling with that perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
One thing they mentioned was the importance of practicing mindfulness.
Yes.
Have you found that to be helpful in your work with type 1s?
Absolutely. Mindfulness practices can be so helpful for type 1s because they help them to kind of step back from that constant stream of judgmental thoughts and just observe them without getting swept away.
Okay.
It's about creating space
Yeah.
between themselves and their inner critic.
It's like hitting the pause button on that constant striving and just allowing yourself to be present
Exactly.
in the moment.
And the articles also emphasize the importance of self-compassion,
Well, yeah.
learning to treat themselves with the same kindness and understanding that they would offer to a close friend.
I think that's something that a lot of type 1s really struggle with.
It's true.
They're so quick to judge themselves, but they would never dream of being that harsh with someone they loved.
Yeah, it's true. And yet that inner critic can be so relentless.
Right.
And that's why it's so important for them to cultivate that sense of self-compassion, to learn to forgive themselves for their mistakes and
Yeah.
to recognize that they are worthy of love and acceptance even when they're not perfect.
The articles actually offered some really concrete exercises for developing self-compassion.
Yes.
One that I found particularly interesting was the idea of writing a self-compassion letter.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever used that technique with your clients?
I have, yeah. And it can be incredibly powerful. It's essentially about writing a letter to yourself from the perspective of a loving and supportive friend, acknowledging your struggles, offering words of encouragement, and just reminding yourself that you're not alone.
That's such a beautiful practice. I can imagine being really helpful for type 1s who are struggling with that self-criticism.
It really can be, and it's something that anyone can do, regardless of their Enneagram type.
Right.
We all need a little extra self-compassion from time to time.
Absolutely. And speaking of things that we all need, the articles also touched on the importance of setting realistic goals
Yes.
and learning to celebrate small victories.
That's so crucial for type 1s because they often set such high standards for themselves that they end up feeling, discouraged and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So learning to break down their goals into smaller, more manageable steps can make a huge difference.
And it can help them stay motivated, avoid burnout.
Exactly. And then, of course, it's important to celebrate those small wins along the way.
Yeah.
Type 1s are often so focused on the end goal that they forget to appreciate the progress that they've made.
It's like they're always looking ahead instead of savoring the present moment.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why practicing gratitude can be so beneficial for type 1s.
Oh, interesting.
Taking time each day to really appreciate the good things in their lives.
Yeah.
It can help them to shift their focus away from what's wrong and towards what's right.
And I imagine that can also help them cultivate a more, positive outlook overall.
It definitely can, yeah. Gratitude is a powerful antidote to negativity,
Right.
and it's something that we can all cultivate regardless of our personality type.
As we're talking about all these, practical tips and strategies,
Mm-hmm.
I'm realizing just how much valuable information is packed into these articles.
Yeah. They really are a treasure trove of insights.
And I think they offer a really, balanced perspective on the type 1 personality,
Yeah.
acknowledging both the strengths and the challenges that come with this type.
Absolutely.
And what I appreciate most is how they go beyond just, describing the type
Right.
and actually provide concrete tools and techniques that people can use to grow and evolve.
I agree. They're not just an academic exercise.
Right.
They're a practical guide for living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
One thing that I found particularly interesting was the way the articles explored the different ways that type 1s express their anger.
Oh, yeah.
They talked about how some type 1s internalize their anger while others express it more outwardly.
That's a really important point, and it's something that can be quite confusing, for type 1s themselves,
Right.
as well as for the people around them, because on the surface, type 1s often appear very calm and controlled.
Right. Yeah.
But underneath that calm exterior, there can be a lot of simmering resentment and frustration.
So then how can type 1s learn to express their anger in a healthy way?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about becoming aware of their anger. Type 1s are often so good at suppressing their emotions that they don't even realize how angry they are.
Okay.
So learning to tune into their body and notice the physical sensations of anger,
Yeah.
like, tightness in the chest or a clenched jaw, can be a helpful first step.
Okay, so once they become aware of their anger, then what can they do with it?
Well, that's where things can get a little tricky because Type 1s are often very uncomfortable with expressing their anger directly.
Right.
They worry that it will make them look bad or that it will damage their relationships.
So they might end up bottling it up inside.
Exactly, and that can be really unhealthy, both physically and emotionally.
Right.
So it's important for them to find healthy outlets for their anger.
Like what?
Things like exercise, journaling, or talking to a trusted friend or therapist can be really helpful.
And sometimes it might even be appropriate to express their anger directly to the person who has upset them.
That's right, but it's important to do so in a way that is assertive, not aggressive.
So it's about finding that balance between expressing their needs and respecting the other person's boundaries.
Exactly, and that can be a real challenge for type 1s who are often so focused on being right
Yeah.
that they forget to consider the other person's perspective.
So learning to communicate their anger in a healthy way is really about learning to be more assertive and less judgmental.
That's a great way to put it, and it's a skill that takes time and practice to develop,
Yeah.
but it's well worth the effort.
As we're talking about all this, I'm realizing just how complex and nuanced the Enneagram is.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much more than just a personality typing system. It's like a roadmap for self-discovery and growth.
I couldn't agree more, and the beauty of it is that it's a journey that we can all embark on regardless of our type.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so exciting.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
I know, right? There's just so much to explore.
But before we get too carried away,
Mm.
I think it's time to shift gears and talk about something that's particularly relevant to our listener.
Okay.
The articles you sent over actually included a really interesting section on relationships between type 1s and other Enneagram types.
Oh, yes. That's a fascinating topic. And it's one that can be incredibly helpful for understanding the dynamics in our personal and professional relationships.
So are you ready to dive into the world of Enneagram compatibility?
I'm all in. Let's do it.
Okay, great. Now, before we jump into specific type pairings, I'm curious to hear your overall thoughts on what makes for a good match for a type 1.
Well, in general, I think type 1s tend to be drawn to people who share their values of integrity, fairness, and responsibility.
Okay.
They're looking for partners who are honest, reliable, and committed to personal growth.
That makes sense. They're not likely to be attracted to someone who's flaky or irresponsible.
Right. And they also tend to appreciate partners who are willing to engage in meaningful conversations and who are open to feedback.
Because type 1s are all about self-improvement.
Yes,
So they want someone who's on that same journey with them.
exactly. And they also need partners who can handle their intensity
Yeah.
and who are willing to call them out on their stuff
Right.
when they need to be called.
That's an important point because type 1s can sometimes be a little too focused on being right.
It's true. They can have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to their own flaws.
Yeah.
So they need partners who can provide, a loving but honest mirror.
So it sounds like the ideal partner for a type 1 is someone who is both supportive and challenging.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Someone who can hold space for both their strengths and their weaknesses.
Okay, so now that we have a general understanding of what type 1s are looking for in a partner, let's talk about some specific type pairings.
Okay.
The articles you sent over actually included a really helpful chart that breaks down the compatibility between type 1
Yes.
and each of the other Enneagram types.
Yes, I saw that. It's a really useful resource, and it highlights both the potential strengths and challenges of each pairing.
So where should we start? Do you want to kick things off with one of the more harmonious pairings?
Sure, let's talk about the type 1 and type 9 pairing. This is often considered to be a very compatible match because both types value peace, harmony, and a sense of order.
So they're both pretty chill and easygoing.
Relatively speaking, yes. Type 9s are known for their peacemaking abilities and their ability to kind of go with the flow.
Okay.
And type 1s, while they can be intense, are ultimately motivated by a desire for goodness and a better world.
So they both want to make the world a better place, just in slightly different ways.
Exactly. And I think that shared idealism can create a really strong foundation for a relationship.
But of course, no relationship is without its challenges.
True.
What are some of the potential pitfalls that type 1s and type 9s might encounter?
Well, one potential issue is that type 1s can sometimes be a bit too pushy for type 9s. Type 9s are all about avoiding conflict, so they might not always speak up when they're feeling overwhelmed or resentful.
And that could lead to some passive-aggressive behavior down the line.
It definitely could. So it's important for type 1s to be mindful of their tendency to kind of take charge and to make sure they're giving their type 9 partner space to express their needs.
And it's important for type 9s to learn to be more assertive
Yes.
and to communicate their boundaries
Yeah,
clearly.
exactly. Good communication is key in any relationship,
Yeah.
but it's especially important for these two types.
Okay, so it sounds like the type 1 and type 9 pairing has the potential to be a really beautiful and harmonious match as long as both partners are willing to put in the work.
I agree, and I think that's true of all the Enneagram pairings, you know?
Yeah.
Each combination has its own unique strengths and challenges. It's all about understanding those dynamics and using that knowledge to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
That's a great perspective. So now that we've talked about one of the more harmonious pairings, let's explore one that might be a bit more challenging.
Okay.
The articles you sent over mentioned that the type 1 and type 8 pairing
Oh, yeah.
can be a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Oh, yes. That's definitely a pairing that can spark some fireworks.
Yeah.
Both type 1s and type 8s are very strong-willed and assertive types, so there's definitely potential for conflict there.
It's like a clash of the titans.
It can be, but it can also be a really passionate and exciting match
Okay.
because both types are deeply committed to their values and they're not afraid to stand up for what they believe in.
So they can either butt heads or join forces and become a powerful force for change.
Exactly. It really depends on how well they learn to communicate and compromise.
Okay, so let's break down some of the potential challenges. What are some of the things that type 1s and type 8s might struggle with?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is that both types can be quite controlling.
Oh, interesting.
Type 1s want everything to be done their way, and type 8s want to be in charge.
So there could be some power struggles.
Absolutely. And that can lead to a lot of conflict, especially if both partners are unwilling to compromise.
And I imagine that type 1s might also struggle with type 8's tendency to be like blunt and direct.
That's a good point. Type 1s can be quite sensitive to criticism, so they might not always appreciate Type 8's straight talking style.
And on the flip side, type 8s might find type 1s to be a bit too uptight and rule-bound.
Definitely. Type 8s value freedom and autonomy, so they might chafe under Type 1's need for order and control.
So it sounds like this pairing can be a bit of a minefield.
It can be.
But is there any hope for these two types to find happiness together?
There definitely is, but it takes a lot of work
Okay.
and self-awareness, you know. Both partners need to be willing to let go of their need to be right
Mhm.
and to learn to appreciate each other's strengths.
So it's about finding that balance between respecting each other's differences and working together towards shared goals.
Exactly. And when they can do that, this pairing can actually be incredibly powerful
Okay.
because both types are passionate, driven, and committed to making a difference in the world.
So they have the potential to be a real power couple.
They absolutely do, but it takes a lot of communication, compromise, and a willingness to grow together.
Okay, so we've talked about a harmonious pairing, the type 1 and type 9,
Right.
and a potentially challenging pairing, the type 1 and type 8.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to explore one more pairing before we wrap things up?
Sure. Let's talk about the Type 1 and Type 7 pairing.
Okay.
This is an interesting one because on the surface, these two types seem quite different.
Okay.
Type 1s are all about structure and order, while Type 7s are all about spontaneity and fun.
So they're like oil and water.
They can be, but they can also complement each other really well.
Okay.
Because Type 1s can help Type 7s stay grounded and focused,
Mm-hmm.
and Type 7s can help Type 1s lighten up and have more fun.
So it's about finding that balance between work and play.
Exactly. And when they can do that, this pairing can be really dynamic and fulfilling.
But of course, there are also some potential challenges.
Right.
What are some of the things that type 1s and type 7s might struggle with?
Well, one of the biggest challenges, I think, is that Type 1s can sometimes be a bit too serious for Type 7s. Type 7s are all about seeking out new experiences and avoiding boredom, so they might find Type 1's need for routine and predictability to be a bit stifling.
And type 1s might struggle with type 7's tendency to be, like, scattered and irresponsible.
That's right. Type 1s value responsibility and follow through, so they might get frustrated with Type 7's tendency to flit from one thing to the next.
So it sounds like communication and compromise are key for this pairing, just like with the other pairings we've discussed.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important for both partners to be willing to step outside of their comfort zones and try new things.
Okay.
You know, Type 1s might need to learn to loosen up and have more fun, and Type 7s might need to learn to be more organized and responsible.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where they can both be themselves
Mm-hmm.
while also growing and evolving together.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the key to any successful relationship, regardless of Enneagram type.
Right.
It's about finding someone who challenges you to become your best self while also accepting you for who you are.
Yeah, I love that. It's about like finding that balance between celebrating our differences and then also working together to create something even greater than the sum of our parts.
Exactly. And I think the Enneagram can be such a valuable tool for helping us to do that
Hmm.
because it gives us this language for understanding ourselves and others
Yeah.
in a way that goes beyond just those surface level personality traits.
Yeah.
It helps us to see the deeper motivations and fears that are really driving our behavior.
And that understanding can be so transformative,
Oh, absolutely.
both in our like personal and professional lives.
Yeah,
It can help us to communicate more effectively, to build stronger relationships, and to navigate conflict with more grace and compassion.
for sure.
As we're talking about all this,
Mhm.
I'm realizing that the Enneagram isn't just a personality typing system.
Right.
It's really a framework for personal growth.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about putting people into boxes.
Right.
It's about empowering people to become the best versions of themselves.
And I think that's what makes it so appealing to so many people.
Yeah.
It's not just about, like, understanding who we are. It's about
Yeah.
understanding who we can become.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that that journey of self-discovery is never ending.
Yeah.
There's always more to learn and more to grow.
I love that. It's about, like, embracing the process and being open to the possibility that we can always become more aware, more compassionate, more connected.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really hopeful message,
Yeah.
especially in today's world.
It is. So for our listener who's been soaking up all of this amazing information,
Yeah.
where would you suggest they go from here? What would be the next step on their Enneagram journey?
Well, if they haven't already, I would highly recommend taking a comprehensive Enneagram test, to get a more accurate sense of their own type,
Hmm.
their wings, and their subtypes.
Right.
Personality NFT offers some really great tests that go beyond just those basic Enneagram descriptions and provide a much deeper level of insight.
That's a great suggestion. And once they have like a good understanding of their own type,
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage them to start exploring the different resources that Personality NFT offers.
Yes.
They have tons of great articles, videos,
We do.
and even an online community where people can connect with other Enneagram
Yeah,
enthusiasts
that's a great resource.
and share their experiences.
Exactly.
So yeah, don't be afraid to dive deep into those different subtypes and the levels of development.
That's where the real magic of the Enneagram happens.
Absolutely. And remember, this is a journey, not a destination.
Mm-hmm.
Be patient with yourself, stay curious, and enjoy the process of self-discovery.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of the Enneagram Type 1, the Reformer.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating exploration.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for all the insightful questions.
And to our listener, we hope you've gained some valuable insights into the heart and mind of the Reformer. Remember, the Enneagram is a powerful tool for personal growth and transformation.
Absolutely.
Use it wisely, use it compassionately, and most importantly, use it to become the best version of yourself.
Couldn't agree more.
Until next time, keep diving deep